It's so fun to see all your faces. Like it's not nearly as fun to not be in the same room with you all, but it is super fun to have that moment where everyone arrives from breakout rooms. So it's like surprise.
Yeah, when the technology works, you mean?
That's right. When it works, it's
That's a
like
good thing.
confetti and glitter of grace and goodness all at once, like flooding my screen. So thank you. And I hope that you had some good conversations and you got to meet some people that were surprises for you in the midst of this work. I have the privilege to just invite you to listen very quickly. Everything that we're going to be doing today is fairly quick because we have a lot of wisdom to share in now about 45 minutes or so. And so this is a prayer practice that we use with Creation Care Alliance and Green Chalice as well, which is a way of listening to God. And so I want to invite you, you're welcome to turn off your video or keep it on if you'd like. But I'm inviting you to listen to your own life, if you will, for a moment, a time when you notice God in nature. May have been a time of awe or wonder, of mystery or terror. But try to remember just one image or experience that stands out for you as you invite God to look back on your life. As you have that memory, try to remember if you were alone or if you were with others. Remember now the prevailing colors. Was it dark or light outside? Can you recall the sounds that you heard during that moment of awe? Can you recall the scent or the things that filled your nose? Remember, if you can, the temperature. Was there a breeze? Was it still? Try to recall the feeling, your reaction to this experience. Did you have any thoughts or resonating feelings in your body? Notice now, if you can, what you're feeling right now in the midst of this memory. And in your own way, silently, I invite you to give thanks to God for this brief moment of prayer. Invite your attention to steadily move back towards the rectangles on the screen. And as you do, I invite you to share in the chat box maybe a main character from your story and the prevailing feeling that you have right now. So for me, it might be chipmunk and gratitude. And you can just put that in the chat as we begin to move forward with the rest of our time. Many people would say that you just had the first reading of our time together, the first scripture, which is God's presence poured out through creation, and that the holy scriptures of Bible and others are next chronologically. So thank you all for taking that minute.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to share my screen now and invite us to do this every time. Here we go. So just to kind of ground us in our thread for our presentation today, is that we are people of the covenant. And just to, remind us that God covenanted with us multiple times in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, through Noah, Abraham, Moses, and David, and then also through the life of Jesus. And that every time we participate in a sacrament, communion, baptism, confirmation, we affirm again our desire to be in relationship with God and to be God's, hers, covenantal people. And as we are called to uphold our part, we can just remember the greatest commandment, to love God and then to love our neighbors, all of our neighbors, whether they be human or non-human. And obviously, our call to care for God's creation through, by being covenantal people of the covenant, are all through the Hebrew scriptures or the Old Testament, and also through the New Testament. And the reason that we're coming today with this particular topic is that we know that we will continue to have severe weather events, superstorms, and great fires as long as we continue to have a climate crisis, that the two do go together. And as people of faith, we are called to address both the weather disasters in preparation for them and as places of sanctuary, and climate change, so that one day, perhaps for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, there might be a better day. And we believe that people of faith are the best to lead on climate. We all are in agreement that the earth is sacred and everything in it, and that we're called to care for all that God has created, that our lives should reflect our faith, and that we partner with anyone, ecumenical, interfaith, or no faith partners. And if not me, if not us, then who is going to do this? We believe that you should start with wherever you are, of what speaks to your own heart, rather than trying to do something that really doesn't speak to you or would be very difficult for you. Go with the things that start with the things in your life and in your congregation, the things that speak to you. So maybe it's advocacy, maybe it's food and gardening, maybe it is worship, prayer, meditation. We encourage you to start now, moving toward carbon neutrality, in your congregation or your house of worship or your community, by having a creation care team that covenants together to do this work. The next step, we believe, would be to do some type of an energy audit, and there are many different kinds you can do yourself or hire someone to do. And then from that energy audit, start to set goals and make changes, conserve energy. And as you're doing this conservation work, that you earmark your green savings, the savings that you get from your conservation efforts, as earmarked in your congregation to roll towards new conservation efforts. So that as I save money with my programmable thermostat, that money is put to the side and is rolled forward to make other conservation changes. So what is carbon neutrality? It's eliminating CO2 emissions as much as possible. And then with any remaining balance, participating in carbon removal, or we also call carbon offsets, which I'll talk about in just a second. One place that you can start as a creation care team is a moving forward guide that can be found at blesstomorrow.org. And Scott's going to be putting in the chat some of these resources. The resources both in English and Spanish, which we are really excited about. So our goal really is, as congregations and as individuals, to move toward clean energy, renewable energy. And the way that we suggest making that movement is to establish a baseline, like where are we? So an energy audit is one way to do that. Calculating your own house or the church's carbon footprint is another way to get a baseline. And you can find a great calculator at Interfaith Power and Light, Cool Congregations Calculator. And then another way that you can just do it is take the last 12 months of energy bills and add up the kilowatt hours and add up how much you have spent. So this again is your baseline. So as you start to make a plan, you develop an energy reduction savings plan, then you know where your savings is and how you're doing. It's a way to demonstrate that to the church. So here are just some things. There are so many, but programmable thermostats, if your congregation doesn't have them, is a great way to save a lot of money right off the top. Insulation, of course, LED light bulbs and automatic lights, and then educate and signage. One program that Green Chalice promotes is called Unity. It is a program that connects congregations with financial capital and also vetted contractors. And you can find that program and link into it at blesstomorrow.org. Our goal again is going to be renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal, and congregations are doing that in many different ways by raising money or leasing panels or having church members purchase the panels and then receive the tax breaks for the church on behalf of the church. But another way, if those are just not an option, solar, wind, and geothermal are not an option for your congregation right now, you can check out Arcadia Power. Arcadia connects churches to solar and wind projects by purchasing renewable energy certificates on your behalf. I have done it now for over 2 years and just love their service. You can choose to have 50% wind energy or 100%. When you go 50%, you actually save money on your energy bill. At 100%, you pay just a little bit more than you would on your own bill. But you can Google Arcadia, and then also it will be in the chat. And then after we get our emissions as low as we can and save as much as we can, there's still going to be some carbon emissions, right? And the way that we deal with those is that we zero them out for carbon offsets. A program that I use and have found to be wonderful is Blessed Tomorrow's Cool Effects Offset program. That particular program, they buy clean cook stoves in Uganda, lowering the carbon, of course, but also promoting good health for families in Uganda. But you can also find other offsets, there's many energy efficient offset programs, renewable energy projects, and then there's lots of tree planting carbon offset programs that can be your choice. And then lastly, we would encourage us as individuals and congregations to advocate for climate at the local, state, and national levels by writing letters, emails, calling our legislators, marching and attending rallies, and of course, voting for climate. And one place that you can go to learn about ways that you can advocate on the national level is Creation Justice Ministries. They have a monthly advocacy action, and that you can get on their list and get emails from them. And so it was very quick, but you will have time to ask questions at the end, and this presentation will be given to Scott and to Creation Care Alliance for your review if that helps. And there is my email and our website for more information. And I think I turn it over now to Caroline.
Indeed. And so I will switch to my screen share. As we address the long-term effects of the climate crisis, which I kind of think of as the chronic illness we're facing, we also have to deal with the effects that are injuring, harming, and bringing risk to our neighbors right now. So I think of that in a way as treating some symptoms to bring some relief and relieve some suffering, while we're also trying to treat the greater issue of the climate crisis. I've included some slides here just to give a bit of grounding in some of the science. The National Centers for Environmental Information puts out a great report every year. You can access it through the NOAA website. I have the link very small down here. Over the last 8 years, we have experienced 5 of the warmest years on record in the United States. You can see the much above average for most of the country and above average for the entire country. Similarly, we have seen precipitation record dry in some areas and record wet in other areas, which leads to issues of flooding in those high moisture areas and issues of drought and wildfire. And then, as we've seen this week, mudslide across the West. And we see effects to agricultural and the sustainability of our communities from both of those weather effects of climate change. And then you can see with this chart, there's a lot of detail in this chart, so you could spend a long time looking at the details of the graph here. But overall, it just shows you the increase in the frequency and severity of disasters in the United States. So this tracks billion dollar disaster events over the last 40 years, and that's adjusted for inflation. And you can see the trend. Some of that has to do with the ways we build and where we build and how we mitigate in our communities. I live in Houston. We have a problem with building in floodplains that we probably should address, but we also are seeing more frequent and more severe weather events that are causing more damage. And what doesn't get captured when we talk about the billion-dollar disaster is the human impact. That, along with the financial impact, is the disruption of people's lives, the loss of people's lives, the psychological, emotional, spiritual, and physical toll that it takes on our neighbors and on our communities to experience these disasters. Carol did such a lovely job of summarizing this pattern of covenant through our scriptures. And we often talk in terms of climate around creation care. And we often talk in disaster response about the command to love our neighbors and serve the least among these. But one of the scriptures I find most compelling when talking about the climate crisis and disaster preparedness is the story of Pharaoh's dream in Genesis, where Joseph goes to Pharaoh and interprets the dream of the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows and the 7 years of abundance that will be consumed by the 7 years of drought and famine unless they do something. And God's wisdom in the moment is to prepare during the 7 years of abundance, and calls Joseph to lead that effort. And because of Joseph's effort and Pharaoh's willingness to eat some crow and listen to Joseph, they are able to provide not only for their own people, but for their neighbors as well. In chapter 41 of Genesis, we see all the world came to get grain from Joseph because the famine had affected everyone, but Egypt was prepared. And so we, as people of faith, have a responsibility to our neighbors to act on the wisdom we have been given by the Spirit and by the scientists among us, that we should be preparing for the future disasters that will face us. We can think about preparedness in a lot of ways, but I think an easy way to start is by thinking about preparing individuals and families, preparing your church in terms of its physical properties and its functions, its ministries, and then preparing to respond in the wider community. In order to do that, we first have to assess our risk. And so part of that is knowing what is likely to happen in your area. And there are lots of different tools that you can use. I'll share a slide in a second to know the likelihood of something happening. But then also thinking about what particularities of your community make you more vulnerable to a particular hazard. So if you live in an area that gets a lot of rain and there's a lot of flooding, but you live in a part of town that typically doesn't flood, your risk to that hazard is relatively low. And so you prepare in a different way. If you live in an area where tornadoes basically never happen, don't spend your time making a tornado evacuation plan. If you live in a place where wildfires happen every summer, maybe prioritize that as you're talking with your community. At weekofcompassion.org/prepare, you'll find a congregational preparedness guide specifically designed for Disciples of Christ congregations, but certainly applicable across any house of worship. And if you want the specific links to your own denominational resources, I'm happy to direct you to those. Mostly just the points of contact change. In that is a risk assessment document, which you can see on the slide here, that will help you do some evaluation and have some numbers to help you decide what to prioritize. And it's great to do this in a group. It's especially great if you can get some emergency management folks from your area to weigh in as you are completing it or assessing it afterwards. These resources can also help you assess your risk in your area and determine some next steps for preparing yourself, your congregation, and your community. Redcross.org has some great things, and you can focus by region. Floodfactor.com compiles lots of different resources and also has an algorithm to take into effect changing weather patterns and rain patterns. So specifically for flood. Ready.gov has all different types of hazards, natural and human caused. And then the Canadian equivalent, getprepared.gc.ca, can help you assess what your risks are. Part of that risk assessment is also thinking through the vulnerabilities and particularities of your community. So perhaps you're an older congregation. None of our congregations are like that, right? You have lots of folks who would have trouble evacuating on their own, folks who may or may not have access to lots of information, folks who may have particular medical needs. If there's an extended power outage, many of us can deal with 24 to 72 hours without power. We might have to dump out our freezers, but that's the greatest impact. For somebody who is dependent on a CPAP machine or dialysis or any other number of medical devices, having a system for taking care of your folks can be really, really important, even for something that can seem somewhat minor in terms of disaster. Once you've assessed your risks, assessing your resources and your assets is the next major step for preparedness. There are guides for doing this, again, in that congregational preparedness guide, but a good way to start is just map out all of your connections. So you can see my little quick version here. And if you were doing this for real, you would actually list out the specifics of these businesses or your local ministry partners. And if you want to get really detailed, you start putting down contact information and how you would specifically connect with all of these people and resources. You can start thinking through both personally and then building up from congregation to region to denomination about your material resources, your structures and facilities. Do you have a huge gym that doesn't get used and could be converted into warehouse space? Do you have lots of parking lot space where responders could park trailers? We have a church that set up a mobile clinic in cooperation with the hospital because a bridge was out and people couldn't get to the hospital. All different kinds of ways to use the assets that you have. And then thinking through those soft assets, the skills, the knowledge, the training, the expertise that exists in your congregation, and thinking about how you could use people's passions and skills and abilities. And then again, mapping that out. The greatest thing you can do to prepare for a disaster is thinking through your connections, your relationships, both folks who may be at greater risk. Miss Barbara, who lives down the street and probably would need help evacuating, all the way through, like, I know the city planner and could probably get some things waived as we are looking at rebuilding. That whole broad network of relationships is crucially important when responding to a natural or human-caused disaster. You'll see on here nvoad.org. National VOAD is National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. The Disciples of Christ are members, as are most of the mainline denominations and a whole host of other faith-based and other nonprofit organizations. And then we have partnerships with government agencies and corporations like UPS and Lowe's, and a great way to start connecting in to the response world. There is a resource on that website. If you go to the resource directory, there is a preparedness resource inventory, and it lists out all the different denominational resources that are available for doing preparedness work as well. I'll drop that in the chat in a moment. And this is Cypress Creek Christian Church, and I'll be handing off here in a second to John. As we do this work, it's always to remember that we are called to care for one another. We do the work not because the building's gonna flood and we don't wanna have to replace the carpets and the walls and it's gonna be a big pain, although all of that is true. We do it because at Cypress Creek Christian Church, the high school students had been having their choir concerts there for their entire lives, and they were heartbroken when they knew they couldn't have their choir concert there that spring. It's the place where people come for service, for care, for the relationships that we have with one another. And so we are called to serve both within our congregations, but through our congregations, more importantly, to our wider communities. So with that, I will pass on to Reverend John Fry.
Thanks, Caroline. And let me continue that story. One of the things I will say about Cypress Creek, now that you know that we in fact flooded in Hurricane Harvey, is that property had never flooded before. So part of your risk analysis needs to look at what has happened in the past, but it also needs to be what could happen in the past. In fact, a year before the incident that you saw in Caroline's picture and these pictures that I'm showing you, this site that I'm showing you was a FEMA disaster recovery center for FEMA. From a flood that happened 1 year before that didn't make it into our buildings. And our buildings were catastrophically impacted. We're just now recovering from this flood that happened in 2017. We hope to have this building back open by Easter. But what it shows you is the impact that can happen. This building is surrounded by communities that were all impacted. But I want to be clear, folks, this building is not the church. We are the church. Our people were up and worshiping in a gymnastics gym the following Sunday after this event. These pictures were taken a couple days later when it didn't require a boat to get to our campus anymore. And what you don't see in these pictures is the picture on the left is the front door to our sanctuary, which is a concert hall for the community as well. To the left of this is a county courthouse annex. To the right is a county library. And behind us towards the water or towards the creek is the county parks and the softball fields and the soccer fields. So these incidents have a much broader impact on the community. Now, we as a congregation, obviously, were disappointed. You can see in the left picture, some of the benches that are around for our people to sit on are still underwater, yet the water has gone down about 1.5 feet from here. This concert hall slopes to the front like many concert halls and had a stage. And if you look to the picture on the right, the double door you can see nearest to you is actually the backstage door. So not only was the front of the sanctuary have 4 or 5 feet of water in it, but the water came all the way up to the keys of a concert Steinway grand piano sitting on the stage at the time. It's otherworldly to wander through and see a wooden stage completely buckled, to see a piano with all of its keys completely buckled, or one of my favorite memories in the midst of this tragedy, to see a pastor and his waders that he uses for baptisms fishing fish out of the front of the sanctuary and tossing them out the door so they can swim their way back. But this is the reality of these types of events. And sometimes we get fixated on our own buildings and our own property. And yet what was really clear to us was we had a mission field completely surrounding us with a community. And I love the moment that our folks could get in here, even in waiters, they were going door to door to door to door, asking folks, do they need help mucking out their homes to get the water damaged things out? Because mold takes over very quickly and devalues properties and ruins them, to the point that many of these homes in this neighborhood still have not been recovered because the residents didn't have flood insurance. Why? Because they had never flooded before. Yet if you've ever been through a flood event, you know that your property insurance does not pay any for the losses in a flood event if it's water caused. So it's easy to look at things like this and say, wow, what's the hope? And I want to share some hope with us today. I've had the opportunity through my corporate career to do climate research around the world. And so I've met many individual folks that don't do this for a living. They just have a passion and they want to go out and make a difference. These two folks, the guy on the left owns property in the Amazonian rain basin down in Brazil. And what he realized is people that wanted to raise cattle, there was a lot of money in beef in Brazil and Argentina. And so they started cutting down all the trees that provided all the runoff protection leading into the Amazon River. And that became a huge ecological disaster. And this woman to the right said, hey, I'm a single person, but I can do something about this. What if we figure out what the native trees were all along the river and then work with a nursery to go put those trees back? People like that bring me hope. We see the same thing happening in groups of citizens that go to Arizona and look at pollinator species. You may not recognize that 60% of our food in the United States requires a pollination, either a bee or a wasp or something that moves that pollen around for it to continue to prosper. And so what happens when things like pesticides or rising temperatures start impacting pollinator species? It could be species declination in Borneo, looking at the animals and what is changing global temperatures due to that, or even looking at the poorest people in Oaxaca, Mexico, which is the poorest state in Mexico, people that live way off the grid that are have water scarcity and other challenges. How do their communities come together to build cisterns so when it rains, we can capture the rainwater, to build small plots of farmland around them so they can be self-sustaining? So there's a lot of hope and a lot of folks that have said, you know, I can't do much, but I can do what's around me. And they've really started to make a difference. And that brings me a lot of hope, but it's not enough. If I put my corporate hat on for a minute, one of the things that I know is there's a whole lot of businesses and corporations that have said this is an ethical issue, this is a moral issue, it's a social justice issue. And so one example of this that I've been pleased to be a part of is when the United States backed out of the Paris Agreement, there was a group of businesses, and you can see here all of the folks that came together with an organization called We're Still In. And this was their challenge to the US government, saying whether or not we as a nation are going to stay in this Paris Agreement and make the carbon cuts that we've committed to, all of these businesses, including mine, CEOs wrote letters and said, by the way, we're not stopping. And in fact, if the government's going to back out of this agreement, we are actually going to accelerate our commitment to lowering carbon emissions and working with others to lower carbon emissions. And you'd be very hard pressed to think of many things in your lifetime that have brought this disparate group of stakeholders together around a common problem of folks that said, we're going to get actively engaged in this problem and really make a difference. Many of them have done things like committed to using 100% renewable energy. So you see lots of companies, including my own, that have made very public commitments. Now, Carol was talking about renewable energy, and you might wonder, well, why is this such a big deal? Well, one of the things is people will not build more renewable capacity if they don't have customers for it. So when large corporations make commitments to transition to 100% renewable energy, as one example, then the utilities are very incented to build that capacity. And in some cases, we've had to say, you build it. We did this for a 10 megawatt wind farm out in West Texas. We said, we will be your customer for every bit of that wind for 10 years. And then that makes a very solid business case for the utility to think about doing that. And finally, I'll just mention that many of these businesses, again, mine included, are setting what we call science-based targets. So they're not only making a public carbon reduction commitment, but it's based on the science that says when we meet that commitment, that we will actually have offset the implication and kept us within the 1.5 Celsius degree reduction that we need to stay in as a planet to not have more catastrophic events or acceleration of those events. So there's a lot of effort and a lot of folks out there making a big difference. And as I say, that brings me a lot of hope. And my encouragement for all of us as citizens of the world and as people of faith, we're called to bring wholeness and restoration to everyone on our shared home. And I love what John Lennon said, and I'll leave you with this quote from him, that you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I have plenty of examples of that. And I hope someday all the world will join us and we can all live as one. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Carol, because I suspect some of you have some questions.
Thank you so much, John. That was just wonderful. And it was great to hear Caroline. And so at this time, it looks like we have about 10 minutes, and we would invite you, your questions, if you would put them in the chat, that'd probably be the easiest. If you want to unmute and be brief, we do only have 10 minutes. We will be open to you unmuting and asking your question that way. And if it's for one particular person, then just name that person, or if you want to type it in. So Mary says, what would you recommend as a first step for a congregation that isn't yet on board? We recommend that you start with something that is your passion at your church. So maybe it's women and children might be an area. Maybe it's celebrating creation and worship. Maybe it's a Sunday school class where you study this issue, and from that Sunday school class, it kind of grows. There was one congregation that it actually started with the youth, a congregation in Florida, that the youth were really passionate about this, and they led the congregation in that way. So start with where you are and where your passions are, and having a team, a core team, is really, really important. Does Arcadia work with churches? Yes, we have a program through Green Chalice, but if you aren't a Disciple of Christ congregation, you can contact just Arcadia. They have a program for congregations, and it's a great program. Oh, great. It looks like somebody said, hey, that's our young adult group that led the Green Chalice program. Congratulations, that's amazing.
Hey, and Carol, one thing I
yes,
would
sir, John.
say for a recommendation where to start, in my corporate world, I work with CEOs and CFOs trying to get them to make a climate difference in their company. And where I start is I tell them, whether you care about the climate challenge or not, do you want to save some money? Would that be okay? And of course, every one of them says, yeah, absolutely. I say, okay, well, let me show you how saving energy saves you money. And oh, by the way, that's got a great positive impact on the climate. So if you can't if you're in one of those congregations that have skeptics, or that's just not going to work for you as the lever, find the other lever. And generally the saving money lever works really well in congregations.
Yes, thank you. And also, of course, we are people of faith, and the scriptures I showed you on 2 slides we're numerously called to do this work as people of faith. So starting in scripture, starting with what your passions are, asking your church, do you want to save some money?
And then from the disaster preparedness side, I dropped a link in the chat with some really easy steps, because success is a really good way to breed more excitement. So some things that you can check off on the to-do list really quickly. The other piece is we often get requests at Week of Compassion right after a disaster happens. How can we help? We want to go help. And I say, okay, well, mark your calendar for 6, 9, 18, 24 months from now, when we'll be ready for you to actually come and be a body helping on the ground. Right now, do something to make your church more prepared, so when the disaster is in your community, you're ready to be that help to your neighbors.
Yes, thank you. And Scott just dropped in the chat. Scott, Caroline, and myself put together a Lenten resource for the weeks of Lent that can be used either for worship, preparing for worship, or education resource for study. So it's their resource for each week of Lent as a place to start kind of through this lens of covenant and weather and climate disasters. There are, in terms of presentation, there are no, I think you can see, no Black, Indigenous, or people of color who are presenting today. But with that is, I know that Jackie was presenting at the same time in another workshop, and I can't even remember all the workshops that were listed. Oh, not presenters. Then that would be a question for attendees. I can't even see everybody to answer that. If anybody wants to identify themselves, I will let you do that. The name of the Lenten resource is just our Lenten resource that we created. So it doesn't have a name other than that we're people of the covenant, and we're addressing this this issue of climate and weather disasters.
Scott, you know the technical abilities here. Will we be able to capture the chat and send this out to everybody so they'll have all these links?
I mean, we can, Yes, they are stored somewhere. We have also the links in the documents that we're going to share out with people.
Yes, Caroline, I will
So
have the
we're gonna
chat.
send it.
I will have the chat saved and we can use all of them. Yep.
And it looks like Liana says if anyone would like some information regarding medical emergency preparedness, just to reach out to her and she'd be happy to share that. Thank you, Liana. And there's directions on how to save, but I believe our tech person already has that under control. Are there any other last questions? We're really thankful that you all are here today. I think that all of us would leave you with just the thought of get started, wherever that may be, right? So whether it is that you know that your community could be part of some kind of weather or fire disaster, or whether it is your passion and your heart to address the climate catastrophe that we are in, wherever you are, just to move forward. And it's a lot easier to have it as a team than just as one person. And so we encourage you to start with a group of people. It can be a Sunday school class, it can be a team that you put together. Great. And so I see, yes, the PowerPoint presentations will be given to Creation Care Alliance, and that'll be stored in the drive that they share to everybody who participated today. Is that right, Scott? Thank you. Thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon. And of course, there are other workshops with Creation Care Alliance's conference tomorrow. And Scott, do you want to close with a little about that?
Sure, thank you. Very grateful for this to be part of a symposium that is larger than this one workshop. And I would advise you, all the resources that we've shared are really amazing, and Creation Justice Ministries is doing a lot of work about trying to figure out how congregations can be hubs of hope in the midst of this climate crisis. So the mitigation and adaptation are key components to this, and then also compassion. And we do have 4 more workshops tomorrow within our Creation Care Symposium, including a climate grief circle in the morning, and sharing from different perspectives early on. We're going to be hearing from other congregations sharing about their stories of action. Sacred Lands panel will be in the afternoon, and a Solar 101 for congregations will be happening as well at the 3 o'clock time. And I'll put into the chat just a registration if you haven't registered for the event. Feel free to either just reach out to me or Carol, or you can just register for it to get the access to the rest of those workshops. And then if you are a part of that, you're welcome to join us at the next at the 4 p.m. meeting, where both workshops will be coming together for conversation, another song, and brainstorming and kind of debriefing the day from what happened. And I'll get that link too if I can.
Well, and Scott, if folks are staying for the 4 p.m. today, they can just stay right here. They don't have to go anywhere at all.
Don't leave, just hang around.
Nice. That was like wisdom. I couldn't see her, so it just was a voice. I love it. Well, for those of you who are not staying around at 4 o'clock for the 4 o'clock gathering, we give great thanks that you were with us today, and blessings on all of you and on your ministries, your congregations, your houses of worship, and may 2021 be a really good rest of the year.